The history of North Branford begins with a history of the New Haven colony. A group of settlers under the merchant Theophilus Eaton and the Reverend John Davenport came to the Massachusetts colony looking for a place to set up a colony of their own. They wanted a port of some kind. Told about a harbor at an area called Quinnipiac along Long Island Sound. So they sent some men to survey it and decided that it would make an ideal place to set up a town. New Haven, divided it into 9 squares, built their meeting house on what is now the New Haven Green, and started settlement. A year later, one of the Indian chiefs came to Eaton and told him, a harbor in an area called Quinnipiac, and sent some men to survey it. They decided it would be an ideal place to set up a new town. Surveyed it, divided it into 9 squares, built their meeting house on what is now the New Haven Green, and established the town of New Haven. A year later, they heard about some land to the east that an Indian chief was willing to. And it covers the bounds that are now Branford and North Branford. To establish a colony, and he went back to New England to gather up a group of settlers. However, while he was there, he was given another position. So the land remained vacant until about 1644, when after a dispute in Wethersfield, a group of colonists that were offered this area along the Branford River. Down along the Connecticut and settled the area that we now know as Branford. Parceled out the home lots, and the outlying areas were divided into the farmlands. And of course, the seaport was set up at the mouth of the Branford River. It wasn't long before the colonists needed more land, and the 3rd and 4th divisions took place. Meeting house on a spot that is now the old cemetery along Montoise Avenue. The small colony doubled in size when Abraham Pearson came from Long Island with his colonists to join the Branford group. However, it wasn't long before he, over a disagreement on whether church members or non-church members would be allowed to vote in the town meeting, picked up and left Branford with another group of followers, and they went to New Jersey and settled a new town that they called Newark. We know it today as Newark. The town was left without many of its settlers, but it didn't take long to grow in size, and soon they had a minister, the Reverend Samuel Russell. He was minister when they divided the land into the 4th division. And that was the part that was that was the 4th division. During the summers, the young men would bring up their animals to graze in the northern lands, and sometimes they would clear some of the fields and grow some crops. This is the tradition has it that this house on Saul's Path was built as a barn to house the animals during the summer nights for protection. Young men wanted houses of their own, and tradition has it that this is one of the first houses that was built by the settlers in the North Farms area. This is Rolling Stones located along Route 80, and it was built by John Lindsley in 1699. Other settlers were soon attracted to the broad valleys and the bare plains. The bare plains area was an area that was between the mountains, and it was either bare because of it was burnt over by fire or was kept clear by the Indians. Nobody was sure, but it certainly was an ideal place to settle along. Located along the river, and this house on Old Forest Road was built in 1707 or 1708 by Josiah Foote, who owned a mill on the river that ran in front of the house. By the Bartholomew's, a little bit further up, what is now Forest Road. By a carpenter named Benjamin Howe. He eventually sold it to the Lindsley family, and the grandson of the first Josiah Lindsley was Solomon, and that's why it's called Saul's Path. Soon, there were enough farmers in the northern area to want winter preaching. It was very difficult to travel to the Branford Meeting House for Sunday worship. Sunday worship at that time took all day. There would be a 2-hour meeting in the morning and a short pause for lunch and refreshments, and then a 2-hour meeting. So in 1777, they petitioned the General Assembly to become a separate society of their own. It was determined by the General Assembly that there weren't enough farmers living there, but they did grant them winter preaching, which meant that a preacher would come, paid for by the Branford Society, to preach in someone's house during the 3 months of the winter. In 1724, the northern farmers again asked the town of Branford if they would permit them to become a separate society, and it was voted at a town meeting that they could. A spot for the meeting house was quickly selected on the knoll near Samuel Harrison's by the Branford River, and the frame was quickly erected. Reverend Samuel Russell came to give the dedication speech, and there's a story told that during the dedication one of the heavy beams fell, but luckily did not hurt anyone, and this was taken as a good omen. And good or not, there was a problem because the Branford Society rescinded their vote and decided not to pay the committee for the lumber they had purchased for the frame. So work stopped for a while, and the northern farmers again petitioned the General Assembly, and this time it was determined there was enough men and enough money in the town to support a minister, and the building of the meeting house went again. It was located just to the west of the present North Branford Congregational Church. It was a plain building, barn-like, small diamond-shaped plain windows and 3 doors. The first minister of the North Branford Congregational Church was the Reverend Jonathan Merrick, a Yale graduate. The church was organized in October of 1727, and Merrick was given land for a farm located where Central Plaza is now. It wasn't long before the northernmost farmers began to feel that it was too much of a difficulty to travel to the Second Society Church for Sunday meetings. And so after petitioning the General Assembly over a period of several years, permission was finally granted in 1749 for the Third Society of Branford. At first it was called Salem, and then it was called Northford. We're not quite sure why it was called Northford. It might have been because it was north of the ford of the river, or it might have been a contraction of North Branford. The meeting house was built on the site of the present Congregational Church in Northford. The first minister of the Congregational Church there was the Reverend Warren Williams, a Yale graduate and a descendant of the Williams family of Deerfield, Massachusetts. He built this beautiful Georgian house located next to the present Northford store. The doorway of the house is shown here, and it's a replica of the doorway of his grandfather's house in Deerfield, Massachusetts. The Episcopalians were taxed even though they were Episcopalians, to support the congregational ministry. But they struggled, and the first Episcopal church was established in 1763, and it was located next to what is now William Douglas Commons. This, of course, is the St. Andrew's Church in Northford. The second minister of the Second Society was the Reverend Samuel Ells. He came to take over the ministry in 1769 when Reverend Merrick had suffered some kind of a stroke and it incapacitated him. He was given £200 to build a residence for himself on what is now North Street, and this house still stands on North Street very much in its original condition. In 1765, Nathan Palmer gave a piece of land to the town. The land is now where the Atwater Library sits. It was given as a place of parade and for public exercise to remain open forever. And this house, the Hezekiah Reynolds House, was built in 1786 to face the Little Green. It was during the Revolutionary War. Most of the men of the three societies of Branford supported the rebellion against England. And the story goes that one day the Reverend Samuel Ells was preaching on a Sunday when word came that they needed volunteers to fight the British in New York. So he gathered the men on the Little Green after services, and they formed a company, elected Ells as captain, and marched off to fight the British, defend New York against the British. Another colonial hero was the Reverend William Douglas. He had purchased a farm in Northford, where this house is now located on Village Street. This house is also interesting because it was the original home of the Brock Dairy. Colonel William Douglas was tapped to lead a company up along Lake Champlain to defend the American colonies against any attack from the British from Canada. He was so successful in defending the lake and keeping it free from the British that he was made a colonel, and they called him the Commodore of Lake Champlain. After the winter was over, he came back to Northford and was elected to the colonial legislature. Unfortunately, he had caught a chill or some kind of a disease when he was during the campaign, and he died. And his grave is located in the Northford Cemetery, and with his wife next to him. This little house on North Street, it doesn't look like this today, but it was built by one of the soldiers who fought in the Revolutionary War, Jacob Page. Schools were always important to the columnists, and they established schools almost as soon as they established their societies. They were one-room schoolhouses, and this little red schoolhouse once stood on Forest Road. There were 7 school districts in North Branford, 3 in the North Branford end of town and 4 in Northford. One of the schoolhouses, the first schoolhouse, stood on the green next to the Congregational House, next to the Congregational Meeting House. When the Civil War monument was put in this site, the school was moved across the street. Education was important to the columnists, and these are some of the textbooks that they might have used in the schools. This map, the Beers map of 1868, shows the 7 school districts and how the town was formed. One of the schools was located up on Beach Street, Beach Corner School. The Episcopal Society was in North Branford end of town, was formed in 1812. Soon after the Middletown Foxen Turnpike was laid, and they decided to build their house of worship on that road, on land that was they bought from the Harrisons. It must have been an impetus to the Congregational Society across the street to build a new meeting house. Their meeting house was getting old and needed refurnishing, and instead they decided to build a new structure. It was built in the Greek Revival style, not the picture that you see here, and it cost them about $3,000 to build it. It was finished in 1830, just about the same, just in time for the first town meeting to be held in its basement, because in 1831, the second and third societies of Branford were combined and incorporated as the town of North Branford. This house that stands along Route 80 was once a tavern along the Fox and Killingworth Turnpike. There were always dams along the rivers and that served the farmers in the area. Grist mills, sawmills, fulling mills to toughen up and treat the woolen cloth that was wove on the looms. This is a dam in North Farms Park that once served some of the mills. In Northford, the Middletown Turnpike was laid about 1818 and right along beside the Farm River. And mills were always important to the early settlers. They needed mills to saw their lumber and grind the grain. The mills, of course, were located along the rivers, and this dam in North Farms Park once served some of the early mills. Of course, they were along the rivers so that they would have water power. And another mill was located here at Page's Farm. This was a grist mill, and across the street there was across the dam, was a sawmill, and down the stream a little way was a fulling mill. A fulling mill was used to treat the woolen cloth that was woven on the looms. Weaving was a very early industry. Almost every home had a loom where cloth was woven for barter or sale. In 1818, the Middletown Turnpike was laid between New Haven and Middletown, and by doing so, it created the little Northford Green, crossing what was Old Post Road and Clintonville Road. The juxtaposition of this road with the Farm River in Northford gave rise to quite an industry revival in Northford. The Fowlers, who lived in this house, built a mill on the Farm River that made all kinds of tinware, rivets, horseshoe nails, pins. They were quite an inventive family, and the 6 sons of William Fowler, invented many, many things to do with the industry in Northford. This is some of the tinware that was made at their factory. The mill itself, or the factory, was located behind what is now the Northford Post Office. And there are some of the rivets that were made in Northford. The Bartholomews, who lived in this house right on the Northford Green, joined with the Fowlers and helped them and helped finance their manufacturing. A little bit further up Middletown Turnpike is this lovely home that belonged to Samuel Maltby. He was a sea captain, and he had a route that traveled down to the islands in the Caribbean. One of the products he brought back was the coconut. And his cousin, Chapman Maltby, who lived across the street from him, decided that it would be good to use the coconut husk to make dippers, water dippers. And this is Chapman Maltby's house. They set up a factory and started making the dippers and throwing away the meat of the coconut. Someone of the workers in the plant said it was a shame that they were throwing away all this coconut. And so Chapman Maltby's kitchen was turned into a laboratory, and they experimented and came up with a way of drying the coconut and so it could be preserved. The Fowlers down the way made the tin cans to sell the coconut in, and the coconut won the first prize in one of the world's fairs. Chapman Maltby could have cornered the market and become the person who was responsible for this type of coconut, but his father kind of put a kibosh on it and said that he didn't want his son fooling around with any of those New York financiers. Edward Smith, who lived in this house that's now on Maltby Road, was one of the men that manufactured a self-operating horse-drawn hay rake. He rented part of Maltby's factory, which was located where Restland Farm is, to produce this horse rake. And this is the remains of the big factory that was once located there. If you look closely, you can see the mill wheel in the center. Further north along Middletown Avenue is a house that was once built by David Stevens. Just to the south of it is a small stream, and Milo Todd had a mill there that made straw wrapping paper used for wrapping the ammunition during the Civil War. He sold the mill to Stevens, who used it for making flatware, silver-plated tableware, and tableware made out of Britannia. But soon that mill was too small for Stevens' operation, and so he came down and used part of Maltby's mill to produce his tableware. This eventually was moved out of town and merged and became the International Silver Company. The Civil War saw many men from North Branford and Northford volunteering to fight the Northern cause. And this monument, erected on the green, is said to be one of the first in the country to honor those that died. When the monument was erected, the schoolhouse was moved across the street and located next to the burying grounds. Eventually, it was replaced, the small schoolhouse, similar to the Little Red Schoolhouse you saw earlier, was replaced by a new structure. And if you look at this picture, you can see the division in the roof that was the one-room schoolhouse that replaced the old Center School. This too was called Center School. This is another school building that's located up on Mill Street, and it's now been turned into a residence, and it looks a lot different than this picture now. During the latter part of the 19th century, the industry moved out of town for two reasons. One, there was never really enough water power to expand the operations, and secondly, the railroad track that was supposed to be laid through the center of Northford was decided to lay it 2 miles to the west through Clintonville, and the lack of the transportation and lack of enough water power caused most of the industries to either cease or move out of town, and North Branford drifted back to an economy that was dependent on its farms. And the population actually dropped from over 1,000 to a little over 800. The mills, as I mentioned, a lot of them moved out of town. The one at North Farms Park, where the dam is now located, did continue through the end of the 19th century, manufacturing mostly ship's timbers for the shipbuilding industry in Fairhaven. North Branford was very much dependent on agriculture and the produce raised on the farms for their economy. And the other big industry in town was always lumbering. The latter part of the 19th century, a group of businessmen in Northford decided that the town needed a store, and they sold shares and raised enough money to build a 3-story building. The bottom floor was used as a store, a general store. The second floor was a hall used for town meetings, and the top floor was used by the Corinthian Lodge, which is part of the Masonic order. North Branford was a very close community and a small place where most of the families either knew each other or at least knew of each other. The ladies organized a ladies' sewing society about 1877. It wasn't limited to the members of the North Branford Congregational Church, and most of the ladies in town belonged to it. They decided they needed a place to meet, and so they raised the money to build the chapel at the North Branford Congregational Church, the building that you see to the right. And it was first called the Ladies' Parlor. During the beginning of the 20th century, about 1916, the New Haven Trap Rock Company started quarrying on top of Tutucket Mountain. And the population began to increase with the workers that were brought in to work the quarry. The operation became quite extensive, and at one time, the New Haven Trap Rock Quarry had the largest single-face quarry in the world. These houses that you can see from Route 80 were built for the foremen that worked the quarry. Other nationalities began to immigrate to America during the 19th and early 20th century, and many of the old farms were sold to people of German and Irish and Italian and Czechoslovakian background, and the names in town began to change. This store that once stood on the corner of Route 80 and 22 served the North Branford end of town. And also there was a trolley, the shoreline trolley that traveled between New Haven and the shoreline towns, and it passed right behind this building. And the tourists could stop and stay overnight here. World War I came along, and quite a few men from North Branford and Northford went to fight. In 1920, there was a move to consolidate the schools, and a center school, the new center school, was built, a 3-room school that replaced the 1-room schools in the North Branford end of town. The old center school was turned over to the North Branford Civic Association, who held a great many fundraisers, dances, picnics, and so forth. And to make this building into a town hall, a barn was moved from Madison and joined on to the back, and then a kitchen wing was put in. The North Branford Civic Association was instrumental in bringing electricity to town and also to pave the roads. And this picture amazes me because it was probably taken in the late 50s, and it shows Church Street looking up towards the Congregational Church. The Northford Improvement Society in Northford also accomplished the same type of things for the Northford end of town. By 1925, there were enough Catholics living in town to desire their own place to worship. And after meeting at the Ford House, which was where the Reverend Jonathan Merrick had originally settled, they decided that they would form their own church, a mission church of St. Mary's in Branford. Eventually, they were able to raise enough money to build their own church, and this is the first St. Augustine's built along Branford Road. The bell was called St. Monica's. The late 1920s saw a big change in the geography of the town. The New Haven Water Company started acquiring land to build a reservoir, and the dam was built between the two mountain ridges to contain what is now Lake Galad. The lake covers approximately 22 residences and farms that were some of the first settlers in North Branford had built their homes. A lot of the land around the reservoir was acquired for watershed, and now the town changed the circulation pattern of the town. When they were building the dam, dinosaur tracks were discovered, and this is one of them that was preserved. This a copy of an 1868 map, stated the wrong way, shows what the town looked like prior to the building of the dam. William Douglas School was built in 1925. It replaced the four district one-room schoolhouses in the North Branford end of town. And a few years later, in 1929, Jerome Harrison School was built to accommodate the increasing school population brought by the workers for both the New Haven Trap Rock Company and the New Haven Water Company. The Depression hit North Branford as it did other towns throughout the country, but the community pulled together, and many residents today remember the 30s as a time of great fellowship and community spirit. It was during the 1930s that the first North Branford Fife and Drum Corps was organized. The members, shown here in a picture that was probably taken after World War II, were young boys when the Corps was first formed. And they did so well that the drum unit won the first prize at the World's Fair in New York City in 1939. Also in 1939, the town acquired its first fire engine and formed the volunteer fire departments that we know today. The first fire station, or where the fire engine was housed, was up on the end of North Street in the Harrison barn. Many of the North Branford men fought in World War II, and this is the honor roll that stood for many years on the green. After the war, North Branford changed from the quiet country town that it had been up to date, and this is a picture of what the corner of Route 80 and Route 22 looked like soon after the war. The veterans coming back from the war found new prosperity. They were able to buy cars, and because they had transportation and because they desired a place of their own in the country, North Branford began to grow. This is one of the first gas stations that appeared along Route 80. Subdivisions began to take place on the old farmlands, and this subdivision at Sunset Drive was one of the first in town, built soon after World War II. The population of the town began to grow so fast that new schools were needed, and in 1957 the new junior high school was built, followed quickly by an additions to the William Douglas School. The Stanley T. Williams School in Northford was built, and in 1964 they started on the new high school, the first high school the town had ever had. Prior to this, students would travel to surrounding towns to go to high school. The last school to be built was the Northford Intermediate School. Center School, abandoned when Cedar Lake School was built, was turned over to the town for use as an administration building, and for the first time all the town offices were contained in one building. Prior to this, the town clerk's office would be located in the town clerk's house, and the assessor would be at the assessor's house, and the tax collector would be at the tax collector's house. Zion Church, which stood on Route 80, began to lose all its front yard when the road was widened, and since there was no room to expand, it was decided to move the church. In 1957, it was put on a platform, turned around, backed down Notch Hill Road, just clearing the bridge, I understand, by 3 inches, and placed on its new site. And a parish house was attached, and appears the way it appears today. North Branford Congregational Church also grew. It added a parish house, moving the old chapel forward and joining the church and the chapel. The first burying ground, located about where the chapel was, the graves were moved across the street. The Fife and Drum Corps had partially disbanded. Its members busy with other young families and jobs, and a new group, the North Branford Minutemen, was formed. In 1970, North Branford changed its form of government from a board of selectmen to a town council, town manager type. And because of the effort made by the townspeople in changing their government and adopting a new charter, North Branford was named as the All-American City. It was celebrated by a parade, and this is the float that the high school students made. North Branford Hall was turned over and became used as a senior citizen center. The new police station was erected on Forest Road, about halfway between the two village centers, for the police department, which had been organized in 1971, and the police station was built 5 years later. New industry began to move into town. Pickers built their plant up on Clintonville Road, and it's now Firelight. And Trap Rock began to expand and built its headquarters on Foxon Road. This is before it was the the building itself was expanded. A new town hall was built in 1979, replacing the old administration building. And after a group of people worked to save the old administration building, it was turned over to the Historical Society. The stores expanded. Northford store was developed into a small supermarket. And this map showing the circulation system in North Branford shows what happened with the development of the new roads, the new developments, how the town grew around the lake in the center. There's still lot of rural atmosphere in North Branford, is shown here in Page's farm dam. The dam along the Forest River collapsed in the 1960 floods, and the Mill Pond Tavern was built about the same time. New houses, different architecture sprung up around town, and yet some of the old houses were preserved. According to the last two plan of developments, the most desirable characteristic of North Branford is its rural atmosphere. And some of the old houses that add to that are still around.